I hope everyone is fine and listening to this class because it's full of content and very complex because of that. And I'm not touching even like the probably 10% of what is really Leonardo and Da Vinci, of course. But we're going to talk about the relationship and how they're going to kind of be rivals at the same time, even though one is older than the other. But they live in Florence more or less at the same time. So even though they're not copying each other, they're going to be influencing each other a little bit, at least. So we're going to see their lives and their work. And of course, I brought for this.
Baja, if you're talking, we at home cannot hear you.
Not talking. Okay, this is a class, you can go home. That's it. I just thought about that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how do we know about that rivalry? Because Giorgio Vasari, and I always refer to this man, who's going to write about the lives and the work of the Renaissance artists. And he publishes his work, The Lives of the Artists, in 1550. And it's really, till today, it's one of the main sources where we learn about those artists. But a lot of things are made up, so we have to be very careful. But we know about that kind of rivalry because Vasari spoke about it. But let's go a little bit back to the Renaissance because it's really important to understand where we're at. Renaissance, it means rebirth. And rebirth to what? Rebirth to seeing antiquity, to cherish or understand the Greek and the Romans, their philosophy, their art, and many other things, of course. But this is the first time that men are aware of history. They create their own history. They change their history. We're coming from what is called really the Dark Ages, but it's not really dark, even though they are going to name them like that. But it's not really dark. We have a lot of things that were done during the Middle Ages, which is Gothic cathedrals and many advancements as well, but a little bit slower. During the Renaissance in Florence, everything is going to happen at some point very, very fast and in the same place. So you can imagine that. So this is the School of Athens. This is a painting by Raphael. It is at the Vatican. It's very known. But why do I put it here? Not because of the masterpiece that it is, because we're not going to talk about Raphael, but because here is Leonardo da Vinci. He is shown as Plato. And here we have sitting down Michelangelo as Heraclitus. So Raphael is going to place all of the important figures of his time in this painting called the School of Athens. So we have that these two men are important, of course. Now, if we go back to the Middle Ages, the term Renaissance man was given later by, or not Renaissance man, Renaissance in general was given by Vasari later on, 1550, but they named the previous era the Dark Ages. So if you have darkness, then you have light afterwards. Of course, that is a contrast, that's the idea. But of course, they thought that the barbarian tribes invaded Rome and they were not knowledgeable, they were not really civilized people, but they did have their own culture. We have to take that into account, even though it is kind of banned by the Renaissance because they want to go back to the previous era, which is the Greeks and the Romans later. So this is just to show you. So they're going to learn based on the classic sources, Roman and Greek. And I'm just mentioning some of the writers, Virgil, Ovid, Cicero, as it's called, Aristotle, Plato, and many others. But imagine this, how can you put this together with Christianity? Well, they managed to do that. And this is the first time that they think that humans are important. Not only God, but this is the most, I would say that they get closer to God because they are humans, of course, in relationship to God. They are not afraid of God anymore. They are just worshiping God. But at the same time, we have that they have an educational reform. And that is going to happen very quickly. The philosophers, the writers, the educators are going to become humanists and also called Neoplatonisms. Why Neoplatonists? Because Plato, of course, the writings of the Greek and the Roman. And a lot of changes are going to happen during this period. So they're going to incorporate the Greek philosophy with also Roman history and many other things with Christianity. That is, for us, it's really strange. But this is the first time that we have since the Roman period that we have the importance of humans, the importance of the body, anatomy, for example, or painting or sculpting in the nude, which we don't have that. It was actually banned by the church during the Middle Ages, and that's going to change dramatically. I'm just showing you this painting, just as you can see, some of the things that were developed during that time in the Quattrocento, which is the 15th century, and later on in the 16th century. But this is the story of Joseph. So we have an artist who is painting with perspective that we also see that it is a reinvention or rediscovery, actually, of perspective by Brunelleschi, by the way. So we have an interior space and then a narrative. Everything is going around. There's a lot of things. And the names in Italian, Giuseppe and many other names that you can see right there. And I need my glasses. Sorry about that. Yeah, Jacob, which is with G instead, Benjamin, everything is in Italian. So there's a lot of changes. The other thing that happened is that in 1453, Constantinople is going to fall to the Ottomans and is the end of the Byzantine Empire. Now, before that, let me just tell you a little bit about what happened before. Rome is going to be divided in the 5th century into two different places. One is in actual Rome, Italy, and Europe, and the other one is going to be in what is today Turkey and Asia Minor. So we have the big Byzantine Empire is really very important because this is the continuation of the Roman culture. When the Romans fall to the barbarian tribes, what is going to be preserved is in Constantinople. So when Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Empire or to the Ottomans, they're going to come to Europe again with all of that knowledge, with all of those manuscripts that were preserved in Constantinople. So this is the continuation. That's how it is. That's why it's important. Here we have that what happened. So first of all, the Ottomans that are going to rule what it was before the Byzantine Empire, they're going to close all the schools. They do not want people teaching Greek or Roman philosophy anymore. So scholars from that area are going to come to Italy, and some of them are going to be invited into Florence. They're going to be part of the Medici circle, or the Medici court, how you want to call it. And here we have a painting where the Ghirlandaio paints, first of all, an image of the Bible. But here we have a very interesting detail. 4 people are right there, and they are the 4 humanists. Cristoforo Ladino, Marcellino Ficino, Angelo Poliziano, and Demetrius Chalcondyles that comes from Turkey, that comes from Constantinople. It was not named Turkey at the time, excuse me. But here we have the importance of those philosophers, those writers inside a painting inside the church. So you have here that the popes are also going to be humanists, and they're going to be writers. They're going to be patrons of the arts, of course, and they're going to have huge libraries and art collections. So I'm mentioning some of them: Nicholas V, Pius II, Sixtus IV, and Leo X. And they're going to be, of course, patrons of the arts. And that is also a huge advantage for the artists during this period. Imagine, first of all, the first patrons of the arts are the church. But if they are also humanists, they open the minds of everyone to open, and they open the ideas that are new. They're open to ideas that are new. Let's talk a little bit about artists or people who are important, that are the universal men or the Renaissance men, like Leon Battista Alberti. He wrote the book that is known that he wrote is Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture. Ought to be, it's not, I'm sorry, he wrote a book very important that's called De la Arquitectura, about architecture. But he writes, painting, sculpture, and architecture ought to be classified amongst the liberal arts like poetry and rhetoric. Up to this point, the arts were a craft. Artists were not important. They would just build a cathedral, they would just paint a fresco inside a church, but they were not important. Nobody would sign their work. Nobody knew even their names. They were the master of the so-and-so altar, or the master of the so-and-so church, or whatever. So he's going to be one of the people who are going to challenge this notion. And he's going to be a universal man, as many others during this period, also called Renaissance men, because he was an author, as I mentioned, he writes, he's an artist, he's an architect, a poet, a priest, a linguist, philosopher, and also a cryptographer. And he is known for his architectural pieces that he made all around Italy. And if we think about before what happened in comparison to the Middle Ages, but the precursors of the Renaissance, we can talk a little bit about Giotto. And I always mention this because we forget about what happened before. It's not all of a sudden that we have a Leonardo da Vinci. We have a development. And one of them is Giotto. Of course, we see here that the invention of perspective, or not the invention, the new discovery of perspective, because the Romans, by the way, used perspective in their frescoes in Pompeii. But the new discovery of perspective is still very, very, I would say, simple, not as complex as it's going to be later with Brunelleschi. But here we have a painting that shows you a window into an interior, into a space. So we already see an image of Christ among the doctors. So this is the temple, and all of the rabbis are listening to Jesus Christ as a young man. But here we have an interior space that looks like a cathedral, right? So we understand what's happening. We see that the space is as important as the people there, as the figures that are there. Now let's see a little bit about architecture, because I spoke about Filippo Brunelleschi. And I think I showed you this image of the Church of San Lorenzo, because what he's going to do is to try to have a very harmonious measurement of the human being in comparison to the architecture. So what he does, he makes a covered ceiling that is all squares, and we as humans can relate to those dimensions in comparison to a Gothic cathedral. So what do we feel when we are in one place or in the other? Can you guess? I don't know if you have had that experience. When you enter a Gothic cathedral, what do you think about entering a place like that? Scary? Overwhelmed, yes. The height? What else? What?
The heavens.
The heavens, exactly. God is there. God is magnanimous, is really powerful. The height, the dimensions, you feel scared. Exactly, that is the idea of a Gothic cathedral. Higher, taller, everything is magnanimous. But in Brunelleschi's church, we feel that we belong there. We are happy there. We are okay.
Welcome.
Welcome, exactly. It's perfectly said.
There's a warmth to Brunelleschi's. There's a warmth to it.
There's a what?
A warmth.
A warmth. Well, yes, there's a warmth, but also, let me tell you, probably you feel the warmth, yes, because of the dimensions, but also because of the color of the
Yeah.
picture. Probably that's not really
Not
it.
yet.
Exactly, but yes, but I understand what you're saying. So we have, this is, by the way, one of the architectural pieces of Alberti. So what he does is he's incorporating, he's not the first one that he does it, but it is the best example to show you how he's incorporating Greco-Roman elements into an architectural building that is new. So he's going to use the pediment. In this case, he's broken it in the center, but we see the arches. Sometimes we see also the columns that are a reference to Greco-Roman architecture. So of course, we see that reference. We don't have that in the Middle Ages. There's a completely different architecture. Also, they are seeking for beauty. And they bring mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. They want to represent beauty. Beautiful, idealized pictures of women and men, the best body, the best features on their faces. And this is a painting by Botticelli. But we have that, there is an interest. So it's not to praise God, it's to praise humans. Why do we have a painting like this? It's not for a church. It is for a patron of the arts, somebody who commissioned this kind of painting, that it is based on a myth. So we have there's also a great influence from the north, the Netherlands. Jan van Eyck is going to influence the way that they paint, because first of all, they use canvas, they're going to use oil, and until that time, we don't have the use of oil in Florence. They use tempera. It's an egg-based painting with water, so, and pigment, of course. But here we have that there's much more depth into a representation if you use oil. One of the first artists who's going to use oil in a painting is Leonardo da Vinci. Just a detail in a painting when he was studying art. But here we have an example of architecture. And look at the date, 1425. It's really early. So we see the light coming through the window. And later on, we're going to have that in the Renaissance in Florence. Another thing that happened in that time, 1480, they're going to discover the Domus Aurea. The Domus Aurea is the house of Nero, which was actually buried underground, and nobody knew about it. They knew about the description of the golden of the Domus Aurea, or the Golden House, because it was really very lavish. Nero would get parties there, and it was really very, very large. But how do they discover it? By chance, of course. There was a hole in the ground, somebody fell in, and all of a sudden, everybody wants to go and wants to see what is the marvelous paintings of the Golden House. And they would go inside this place with ropes, and we see some kind of graffiti in those walls of those artists who came in the 16th century. Raphael is one of them, by the way. And by the way, you can visit the Domus Aurea. It is still an archaeological site, still today, but there are tours and you can go inside. It's really an amazing experience. I was there a few years ago and I really had a blast, because for me it was a very interesting way of seeing through the eyes of the Renaissance artists who came and who went inside. So they would have some ropes and they would just go and observe. And they're going to be influenced by what they see there. Some of we call in art grotesques it comes from this, because a grota is a cave. So they thought it was kind of this cave, and they saw these images, and they're going to call them grotesque. It's those kind of details in decoration in the walls of the Vatican, for example. We see grotesque. If you Google them, probably you can see them. But there were the Domus Aurea was underneath the Trajan baths. That's why nobody knew where it was. When Nero was killed, of course, well, he died, Trajan is going to build his bath on top of that, and actually they're going to erase whatever Nero had done before. So the Trajan baths are still there, and you have to go, of course, underneath to see the Domus Aurea. Okay, so here we have the map of Italy, and it is important to understand the geography. Why do I say that? It's because, first of all, Florence, as many other cities, is an independent city-state. So it does not belong to an empire or a reign. And the importance is that they have Genoa and Venice, who are ports. They have a way to the ocean. So there's trade, of course. But they are in the interior the same as Milan. And they become, of course, traders. They have commerce. And they are very wealthy as a city. So they do not depend on any any empire. And they do not depend on the feudal system. Remember, this is the system that was going on until this moment. The feudal system, there's the lord, and he owns all the land, and everybody works for him. In Florence, that was completely different. And here we have the map again, because they have a privileged site for commerce, and the Italian boot, as it's called, has a lot of ocean and a lot of coastline. As you can see, it can go to many places around the Mediterranean Sea. And that allows them to have influx from other countries, and it will permeate the interior of the today a country. The merchants come and go, and they bring not only goods, but ideas. They bring what they know or what they have seen in other cities and other countries, and they come from all over the world. At this point is really something impressive, that Florence is going to become the capital of knowledge or the capital of culture. But what happened before? 1348 to 1350, the Black Death. This is the plague, the bubonic plague. And actually, only a fifth survived. A fifth of the population survived in Florence. And I'm talking only about Florence. Europe, of course, was decimated. But it was really a terrible shock. What happens when there is a plague like this and you survive? First of all, you change your view of what is life, or how did you survive, or you thank God because you survived. So there are many different interpretations of how you're going to do it. But on the other hand, there's a shift of money. Why do I say that? And this is kind of cynical, but people die, and whatever they left is going to be changing hands. So there are a few people who get richer because there are a few people that survived. That's what happens. But the Black Death is going to bring a new wave of piety, and religiousness. And they're going to offer many, many artworks to the churches, to the cathedrals, because they give thanks to God. So there's a lot of sponsorship of religious altars, altarpieces, and churches, etc., all around. And the other thing that happened is, because there are so many deaths and a few people survive, the skilled workers are very few. So they are, of course, important people, and they become much more notable and much more famous. The same as artists, because they are considered, remember, they were considered craftsmen. So another thing that is very peculiar for Florence and their political structure. I mentioned they are independent, they are merchants, but also they are a republic and they are an oligarchy. And a very important key element is the currency that they have. Very strong currency because they are traders, and it's called the florin. And we have that important families are going to rise, like the Medici. The Medici, probably one of the first banker families, and probably not the first banker family, but one of the few. Actually, they think that that started in Genoa, but there are several theories. But what we see and what we know is that the founder of this family, Giovanni de' Medici, he's going to be the head of the family, and he invented a limited liability. Accounting is also very important, that is being developed in that time. And until that moment, they did not have, credit and debit. And this is going to be invented in Genoa first, but they're going to apply it in Florence. So they become really wealthy. And those families are going to be patrons of the arts. So they are dominant families, the oligarchy, and they have huge art collections. They want also artists to work for them. And they have the big palaces with works from antiquity, but also new artists working for them. So the Medici become one of the dominant families that are patrons of the art. The most famous of the Medici probably is Lorenzo the Magnificent, Il Magnifico. And this is a painting done later by Giorgio Vasari. So remember Giorgio Vasari, I always mention him. But this is the first time in the 15th century that an artist is going to break the tradition of the control of the patron. The patron usually would say, you know what, I want you to paint two saints right here, one angel right there, I want the Virgin right here, and they would really control the narrative of an art piece. But this is the first time that we have some kind of control by the artists, not completely, but some kind. And they start to receive a huge amount of money. Michelangelo is going to become a wealthy man, even though he was very stingy, but we know that he had lands and he had money, and he lived very simply, but he became wealthy. And also Ghiberti, for example. The Lorenzo il Magnifico is also one of the Renaissance men, one of those universal men, because he was a merchant, he was a banker, he was head of state, he was a diplomat, also he wrote poetry, and he's going to be the patron of the arts. So they are interested in many things at the same time. And Florence is going to be a place of competition. We have seen how Brunelleschi and Ghiberti were going to be competitors all through their lives. And remember the baptistry doors that they were, of course, competing. But that kind of competition was very healthy because it will spur innovation. It will spur things that are going to be much more creative to explore different things. And at that time, copying was not negative as we see today. If somebody copies you today, you say, oh, you're going to have a lawsuit. But at that time, it was really part of the process. You need to copy the other ones, and you need to learn in order to have your own style or in order to do something different. But the differences are not as contrasting as we have today. The pendulum, it does not go all the way from one side to the other. So learning from one another becomes really very important. So we have Leonardo da Vinci, probably the most famous artist of the world, and of course, Michelangelo, which is also right up there. So Leonardo da Vinci, why? Because he came from the town of Vinci, that's where he was born. He died when he was 66 years old. He is going to be 23 years older than Michelangelo Buonarroti, and he died when he was 89 years old, which for the time, it was really a very, very long life. And by the way, these two paintings were done by some of their pupils. One is Francesco Melzi, and the other one is Daniel da Volterra, who made this portrait of Michelangelo. And at that time, very few artists are going to make a self-portrait. This is also something very different from today, that we have lots of images about that. So let's try to find their personality. So Leonardo da Vinci, he's known to be very charming, handsome. Michelangelo, aggressive. He was really kind of this impulsive temperament, very rude. He was quarrelsome, and that's why he had his nose broken when he was living with the Medici, by the way. But Leonardo da Vinci was peaceful and charismatic. He dressed very elegantly, always. Michelangelo, he lived very austere, and he was stingy, as I mentioned. He didn't care about his looks. He will always be, if he was sculpting, he will always be covered with dust. But Leonardo da Vinci liked luxuries. Some say that he was an homosexual. That's why he would dress very elegantly. Really, there's nothing, although there are some documents that he was charged with sodomy when he was younger, but there's not really evidence of if he really was openly gay. But really, it doesn't really matter. But what we know about Leonardo da Vinci is that he was unreligious. He was not a devout Catholic whatsoever. Actually, he was against any superstition and anything that was not proven scientifically. While Michelangelo was deeply religious, he was very close to Vittoria Colonna, and he wanted to reform the church because of the corruption. So that is something very important to take into account. The other thing is that Leonardo da Vinci was interested in everything. He did not finish many of his paintings. We only know about 15 paintings that he kind of finished. And Michelangelo, he's primarily a sculptor, although we know him as a painter with the Sistine Chapel, but he was a sculptor. He wanted only to sculpt, although, of course, he needs to do the job. If the Pope asks him to do that, he will, of course, paint for him. We'll start with Leonardo. His full name Leonardo di Ser Piero da Vinci. Piero because that was the name of his father. And this is the ultimate Renaissance man. I've spoken about others like Lorenzo il Magnifico or Alberti, but this one, this man, he had everything. Actually, let's see, he was a Renaissance also. It's the same, it's a synonym of the universal polymath man. And let's just start with the list. He was a painter, he was a sculptor, even though we don't have the sculpture that he made for Ludovico Sforza. He was an architect, even though he never built actually anything, but we do see his skill as an architect. He was a musician, and we know that he entered the court of Ludovico Sforza as a musician, and he was a scientist, of course. He made many studies of the anatomy of human beings. He also was an engineer. He worked with Cesare Borgia, who was the son, illegitimate son of the Pope, to make, and also for Ludovico Sforza, to make machinery for weapons, for war. He was also an inventor, of course, inventing many things. Not all of them, actually very few, they thought that would work at that time. But he had a very creative mind. He was an anatomist, as I mentioned as well. He was a geologist studying the earth and the strata of the earth. Also a botanist. He studied every plant and flower that you can think of. He had a huge catalog of it. And he was a writer. He will also write poetry. He taught himself Latin. He didn't know Latin before because he was illegitimate, and a mathematician, and the famous Vitruvian man, of course, which we're not going to talk about it in particular. We know a little bit about his life. He is an illegitimate son of Ser Piero. He was a lawyer, well known, and probably he had an affair with a servant, Caterina. A few accounts tell us about that. But what we know is that he grew up with his grandparents on his father's side. On the other hand, we have Michelangelo. His father was Ludovico. He was a wool merchant. He will always be struggling for money. There's a lot of letters that he's writing to Michelangelo to give him more money. He will also work for the government because of the influence of Michelangelo. And he was born in Caprese, like the salad, the same name, although here we have the actual town. But he grew up in Settignano, which is a town nearby. When he was young, he's going to enter the household of the Medici. And he's going to stay there for a few years. And as I mentioned, I cannot go to every detail of each one of their lives. But this is the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, one of these fabulous Renaissance buildings in Florence, built with stone masonry. And by the way, this right here, let me see if this is working or not. Here, this design of the window supposedly was done by Michelangelo. But at this point, he's very young. And we have Leonardo da Vinci in the Sforza court in Milan. And he does this. So we're talking about the same period of time. Remember, they're 23 years apart. So by this time, Leonardo da Vinci is seeking the patronage of Ludovico Sforza, and he gets into Milan, and he does this painting, the portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, or the Lady with the Ermine. It's a very important painting, although it's not as famous as the Mona Lisa. And I'm not going to talk today about the Mona Lisa, by the way. Everybody knows about the Mona Lisa. But look at her. First of all, she's looking to one side, kind of somebody probably called her, and she turns around. She's holding that ermine, that whistle in her hands. And the whole body is to the other side while her face is shifted to the other side. So there's movement here, not only by her, but also by the animal itself. There's a lot of things that are very different from other artists at the time. And let me tell you this one, because this one is more or less a contemporary artist. We don't know his name. And by the same as you can see there, Maestro della Storia del Pane, the history of the bread. But here it shows you, and this is just one side. He has, there are two portraits, one of this lady, and in front of her, there's another portrait of her husband. So this was customary to make a profile painting, a profile picture of this lady because she's getting married or because they want to celebrate their marriage somehow. But this is the way that they were painted. Of course, they're nobles, they are from the aristocracy. She is painted in profile. It is very different from what we see already in Leonardo da Vinci's painting. And she was Ludovico Sforza's lover. And probably that is why he has this freedom to paint her in this way and not in a profile, like we see this one, because she's not married to Ludovico Sforza. He was seeking for movement, sensuality. And this is the first time that we have this kind of representation after, of course, the period of the Greco-Roman era. We have the image of this whistle that has the same proportions almost as the hand. This animal is the ermine, is a symbol of purity. Also, it is a pun with her last name, Galerani, because in Greek, the ermine is Gale. And here we have, again, a play of words.
Her hand's rather large in that painting.
It's very large. Yes, it is rather
It
large.
just looks out of proportion for her.
Yes, a little bit because of the foreshortening of the hand. It's kind of like this, so it kind of looks like larger than what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Not everything is perfect. Let me just show you the other one. So here it is. Not everything is perfection in Leonardo da Vinci's paintings. Not in any artist whatsoever, but very close to it. What is Michelangelo doing at the time? He is trying to find his way as a sculptor. And he goes to Bologna and he does some details in an altar. Right there we see San Pacrolo in Bologna. And probably they think that this is a self-portrait as an angry young boy. But look at the contrapposto. The contrapposto means that the weight is just in one leg. And usually you have the torso twisted. That is what is known contrapposto. And probably whoever had taken my class before, probably you know that already. But we see Leonardo da Vinci already doing a lot of things in Milan. And the famous, of course, Last Supper. This is a famous painting at the time. But it was a private place for the monastery, for this place where the monks would have their meal, the refectory of Santa Maria del Grazie. So today, of course, lots of tourists go. If you don't have a ticket before, you will not enter. Let's talk a little bit about this painting. Of course, it's important, and maybe you have seen it many times, but what Leonardo da Vinci is doing here is painting a specific moment when Jesus Christ is announcing, one of you will betray me. And look at the reaction of each one of those apostles. They are reflecting with different feelings and emotions, the degrees of anger and shock, and we are not invited in. We are looking at it through a window. It looks like a window. We are not sitting inside that place, sitting in front of them. But all of those people, all of those figures are trying to react of what they had just heard. Jesus Christ is in the center, and it is the focal point of this painting. So we see kind of this ethereal being, not very well defined on purpose, because of course it's a representation of God, but also because of the deterioration, which I'm going to talk about. Well, Leonardo da Vinci writes, the good painter has to paint two principal things. That is to say, men and the intention of his mind. The first is easy and the second difficult, because the latter has to be represented through gestures and movements of the limbs. So he's studying anatomy for that, to do that. He first started with some sketches like this one. Yes.
Was there a woman in that painting?
No, it's St. John. I know that there's, of course, a lot of talk about it was a woman, but it's the androgynous representation of a young man, which is St. John. So that is the interpretation. He's one of the apostles. But yes, there's, of course, a lot of writing about that. Now, Judas. Look how Judas was portrayed before. He thought, like a tradition would tell us, that Judas is on the other side of the table because he's the traitor. But he decided not to do that. He decided to put him with the rest of the apostles. And there are so many examples where Judas is on the other side of the table. Imagine. So we have here Jesus Christ, and he is centered, motionless, accepting his faith. He's framed by that window, the square in the back, and everything is harmonious and balanced. The expression is of serenity, tranquility. But let's see what else we can find here, because there is one vanishing point, and all of the lines are going to converge in the center, in the head of Jesus Christ. He's based on the golden proportion, of course, and all of the apostles are divided in groups. You can see of three, each one of them. But Judas, if you look closely, is the lower one right here, the lowest one, right? So that is how we recognize Judas, not only because of the height where he's painted, but also because of the attribute that he's holding money, a bag of money. But look at the proportions and all of the measurements, and everything is completely very well thought out, and everything is aligned and harmonious. And you can see all of the lines that I put right here so you can understand what I'm talking about, not only the perspective and the depth of the space, but everything else is right there and completely measured, as you can see right here even in the center.
What's it, Passover?
I'm sorry?
Was that
Yes,
Passover?
it was Passover. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yes, it was the dinner of the Seder of Passover, and they were celebrating that. But the representation right here, they don't have matzah, they have bread. But it was Passover, of course. They were having that celebration. And the golden proportion, which is right there. He's going to study many different people to try to define the character of each one of those figures, or the personality of them. So he does many sketches, many studies, and he is going to search for the intensity of the expressions, the way that they are gesturing, etc. This is Judas, and here we have him. So we see some of the details also in his sketches. Again, we see some of the reactions of the apostles. Again, we see that he paints the figures in the nude, and then he's going to cover them. This is how he knows how the limbs are going to move, or how you put a hand on one side, or a leg that is crossed beneath the table, etc. But there's also something else. You usually see only that part where the scene is happening, right? This Last Supper. But there are lunettes on top of it, also painted by Leonardo da Vinci, and we see the coat of arms of Ludovico Sforza and his wife, and he's the eldest son of his name is Massimiliano, and he had the Duchy of Bari. So what do you think this is? Why do we have the coat of arms of Ludovico Sforza in this religious setting? Any clues?
They're the ones that paid for the painting.
Exactly, he's paying for the painting, he's the patron, but also he is stating something very important. I am the ruler, and this is what I did for you to enjoy. Another thing that is very important to mention, first of all, what it says there, it says Ludovico as Duke of Milan, it says right there over there, and he's justifying his power. First of all, because this is the Dominican order, this convent of this monastery, and the theme of betrayal is very close to him, because he was also betrayed by somebody, and he escaped that treachery. So this is a theme that he wants to make sure everybody understands, because he's the ruler there. And again, we see that Judas, not only he's lower than the others, but look what we see right here, because there's an architectural space. And where is Judas? It's almost behind that structure, even though we see him, of course, if I take it out, wait a second, we see him, but if our eye would just follow those structural elements, we see him that he's out of it, out of this rhythm of the composition. Here we have it. When he was working in it, he was criticized. First of all, it took a long time for him to paint, and he had very few days that he would work. He did not had any discipline whatsoever. And as he was painting, almost immediately it began to deteriorate. Why? Because he was exploring different techniques, and he used tempera, which is water-based, mixing it with oil paintings, and it doesn't go at all in a fresco. It doesn't stay there. So it's not absorbed by the plaster. So of course we see all of these gestures. And his friends, actually, he was a mathematician and a writer, Luca Pacioli, he writes about this. And he says, you can hear the voices of all of them. One of you will betray me, and then everybody is talking. And look at the different gestures, which really I love. It's like this moment that is a catharsis. It's really very, very expressive. But also, Antonio de Baptist, who came, he was from Spain, he visited the refectory, he saw it, he was impressed, but he already said in 1517 that it was beginning to deteriorate, as we see it today. The details that we have are taken from copies, like this one, where we see the salt that was spilled by Judas, that in the original, in the fresco, we don't see that anymore. Only because of the copy, we see some of the elements on the table. Michelangelo is making this marvelous piece of art. It was commissioned in 1498, but it was commissioned by the Cardinal of Saint Denis. And he went to Carrara to pick up the marble, and the next year, the Cardinal died. But nevertheless, he's going to finish it. And actually, that was for the church of Santa Maria de la Febre, and it is supposedly it's going to be called the Madonna of the Febre, which is when they have a fever because of the malaria fevers. So to give thanks, of course, of the survival. But this church became part of the sacristy of the new Basilica of St. Peter. That's why we have it in the Basilica of St. Peter. Let's talk a little bit about this sculpture. So it has a triangular structure, and we see the same structure in some of the paintings that were done by Leonardo da Vinci. It doesn't mean that he's copying him. It is a structure of the Renaissance to use a triangle. We see that very often in many other artists. But look also at her face. She's very young, but she's a mother. She's holding her baby, which he's not a baby anymore. The expression is very restrained, but at the same time very sad, because of course she's accepting the fate of her son that was crucified. This is how you see a mother just mourning her son. But the Virgin is the symbol of purity. Look at the detail of Jesus Christ. This is what we describe as sweet death, the gentle expression of tranquility as he is removed from the cross and she is carrying him in her arms. There's a story that when he presented this sculpture, they thought that another artist had done it, and it was attributed to another man. So he came back and he chiseled his name on that banner and he put his signature. Michelangelo Buonarroti made this. So of course that's why we have his signature. And this is one of the first signatures that we have in the Renaissance. I love this photograph because it allows us to see it in a way that I will never see it, or any of you will, because it's from above. But it has this centrifugal force that goes around, kind of revolving, so allows us to see the movement of this marvelous piece. And I really enjoy seeing this because this is how you understand how he was working in it. And it's kind of going around. Also, look at the detail. Adam's apple, the hands are not touching his body because, of course, he's holding, and there's a fabric that allows her to carry him, but also he's dead, but there's this spiritual weightlessness that we find in this representation of Jesus Christ. The creases of the drapery, or that fabric that is folding, also, remember, this is marble. We forget that very often. There's also the holes of the nail. Remember, he had been brought down from the cross. There's part of the tree as well, because it represents the wood on the cross. We don't see the cross there, but this represents the wood. But also the way that Michelangelo treats the marble. It looks like it's soft and it looks like flesh almost. It's really amazing. The fabric of her dress frames the body of Jesus Christ. He used pumice stone to polish the marble, and instead of using a file, which is what a lot of sculptors would do, sculptors. Also, there's a thing that he does. He uses the way that she's sitting to lift up the part of the back of Jesus Christ. So with her knee, she's helping, the body to come up to kind of the sitting position. And she puts the feet on the rock on the other side to do that. So Leonardo wrote everything, every thought, every invention, everything that he can think about. Michelangelo destroyed most of his sketches. So we don't have a lot of information from that. We have letters that he sent out to other people, but not as a diary or as a journal that like we see in Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was an intellectual, and Michelangelo was an impulsive, devout Catholic. See, Leonardo was self-taught, and he was interested in science and in everything, as I mentioned. And Michelangelo was deeply religious. Leonardo a painter, and Michelangelo a sculptor, although he made paintings. Leonardo da Vinci was this wandering mind, always exploring, always looking to something else, and he became an inventor because of that. But Michelangelo was very focused on his art. He will always be creating art. He was doing that. He was not making scientific discoveries or things like that, but also he is an architect. We have two different views, two different ways of expressing themselves. Both of them are famous. Leonardo is 48, Michelangelo is 25. Look at the difference, because this is very important. He's already very famous and he's very young, and he's going to find a commission. Look also at some of the things that it doesn't mean that they're copying each other. It means that this is the language. Look at the hand right here and look at the hand right there, accepting their fate. This is the pictorial language that we have from the Middle Ages, by the way. We have different gestures that allow us to understand what they are representing. If you are like this, you mean something. If you are like this, you mean another thing. And this is, of course, still today the body language that we have, but they are using it in their work. So both of them are showing two different people accepting their fate.
How many Pietà did he make?
One.
Just one?
Yes, there's another sculpture, but it's not actually the Pietà. Well, it is very similar, but he never finished it. So yes, there's another one, but there's it's
in Florence, isn't it?
Yes, the other one. Yeah, the one that he didn't finish. Yes, it is. It was left when he died. It was left in his workshop, so it stayed in Florence. There's a very interesting story in Florence. Supposedly 1501, and in the corner of this palace, in the Palazzo Spini, there was a group of people, artists, and they knew each other. They are arguing about Dante Alighieri, and they're arguing about that. And that's the story. And again, we don't know if it really happened, but the story goes that they are talking between each other, and somebody asked Leonardo, so what do you think, Leonardo? And Leonardo, he says, ask Michelangelo, he will tell you. And Michelangelo, of course, is angry because of that, and probably he didn't know the answer of whatever they were talking about. And he says, explain it yourself. You model a horse you could not cast, and that is your shame. And he marched off. That horse is the one that he never finished for Ludovico Sforza. So that is a very interesting story as well. But they did not get along, even though, of course, they were in the same city. Both of them were famous, but there was some kind of rivalry. The Sforza horse is this sketch that we have here, where he gets a commission. This happened before. It was in honor of the father of Ludovico Sforza, Francesco Sforza, and it was never completed. Actually, he made a model in clay, and it was destroyed later on by the French army. Also, we see that before we have other kind of work. like we see this Bacchus by Michelangelo and the Virgin of the Rocks, which there are two of them, by the way. They are opponents, they are rivals. Michelangelo, primarily a sculptor, because he wants, of course, the superiority of the sculpture. And that was an argument also during the Renaissance. What is better, a painting or a sculpture? And the answer was a sculpture, you can walk around and have a three-dimensionality about it. A painting is two dimensions. But some artists are going to argue this, and that is not true, because look at the depth of that cave and look at these representations of mirrors and different reflections, etc. So there's an argument that was going on at the time. In 1501, he gets the commission for making the David. The guild, the Arte de la Lana, who is the guild of the wool merchants, is going to commission this. It was going to be for the cathedral. It was going to be placed on a niche. You would look at it from the ground upwards. So take that also into account. So it's massive. The model, first of all, that block that he got was first, an artist tried to use it before. With no luck, he did not use it very well. And actually, there was a crack, and he did not use it. Agostino Di Duccio is the artist. So they have to move that block. It was really very, very large and very heavy, of course. It took 40 men and 4 days to bring the block to the place where he was going to work. So it's going to become the symbol of the Republic of Florence. And I'm going to explain a little bit. What he started working, and he built, of course, a wall, because he did not want anybody to look inside while he was working. He didn't want anybody to see the process. So he worked 3 years in this sculpture, and there was a huge scaffolding. And I'm showing you this because when it was cleaned and restored, look how tall it is, how large this David is. Really very impressive. But there is a tradition in Florence of making Davids. Donatello probably is the first artist who had this commission of making a sculpture of David. And by the Medici, of course, the Medici get the commission. And this is probably the first nude sculpture since antiquity that was done in real life, in life size. So very delicate, androgynous, again, young artist, young figure. And that answers probably your question about the representation of the Last Supper, because this is the way that artists would represent a young man, kind of feminine. So that is one tradition, very delicate, but at the same time, very sensual. And it's going to become this important figure of Florence. What we see right here, let me just go back a little bit so I can show you something. Because here, David is stepping on top of Goliath's head. He is victorious. He had defeated the giant. He had slain the giant, and then he had decapitated this man, Goliath. So he has here this sword, and on top, and the head is on the floor. Here we don't have any head. What's happening here? Anybody?
He's getting ready.
Exactly, he's getting ready. This is before the battle. So Michelangelo chooses to do this moment, which is a very interesting way of looking. Oh my God, it's raining. I think it's pouring. A thunderstorm or something. So he's not the winner yet. There's no head of Goliath. Again, the contrapposto, remember that way of standing where he shifts the weight to one side, resembling Greek sculptures as you find here. So we see that there is an interest in anatomy, in showing every muscle, in showing every part of the body. And look at this detail, because this is really very impressive. So in the sculpture from the 1st century BCE, we have the hand, but in order to support that hand, he puts a part, actually he doesn't carve that place, that part, that rectangle right there, to support the hand. What Michelangelo does, he hides it And it is right there. We don't see it, but it is in the back side of the hand. So it looks more natural. We don't see that part of it. Let me show you the detail. First of all, look at the veins, the way that he is going to do those tense muscles, this moment where he is trying to find the perfect place where he's going to hit Goliath. But look at the back. This is where it is. This is that support that it is hidden away. So you don't see it. It is much more natural. But the nerves are rising, of course, and then we see that expression of he's focusing right in that specific moment. So imagine this scene. Goliath is mocking the people of Israel. This young man who's really tiny and very young, and he doesn't even fit into the armor of the king that presented to him. So, but he's right there. He's ready to strike. And with intelligence, he's going to defeat him. What we are looking at here is what we call terribilità. This is that immense angry force that is being represented here. And this is going to be a characteristic of his work after this. He's going to emphasize the borders of the lips. Everything is really tense. And look at the pupils. Also, they're so intense because they're drilled. There's a hole in there. If you see right there's a hole. That gives us the shadow of the eyes. And look at the back, which is really amazing. Remember, this was not to be seen by anybody because he was going to be up there in a niche on the facade of the cathedral. So you would never see the back of it. But of course, he's going to do it as best as he can, the same as the front. So Florence, why David is the image or the symbol of Florence is because Florence feels that they are this David, that they are against all of those Goliath. The Duke of Milan, the Pope, of course, the King of Naples, the Doge of Venice, and many others that are surrounding them. And usually they want, of course, more territory, and Florence defends itself. But this is the way that they see Florence. Leonardo da Vinci is going to draw David. Look at this drawing, because he's going to be part of the committee to see the finished product when he does it in 1504. And this is really an example of how he was in awe of what Michelangelo was doing. And instead of putting it in the cathedral, they decided they're going to put it in the main square at the entrance of the Palazzo Vecchio, also called the Signoria or the town hall. And this is the first time since antiquity that a nude sculpture is going to place in a public space. The other one was for the Medici palace, the Donatello one. But here we have that David is a political symbol. And this is the idea of the spiritual strength of David in contrast to the physical strength of Goliath. And on the other side that you see right here, supposedly, he gets a commission, Michelangelo, to make a sculpture of Samson against the Philistines. But he actually gets called by the Pope and he leaves. But this is what we left with is Hercules and Cacus by Bandinelli. Those sculptures are not there. The originals are in the Accademia. These are copies, good copies, but they are at the entrance of the Palazzo de la Signoria. So Leonardo is seeking for movement and sensuality, and Michelangelo is looking to represent the expression. So different paths, different goals. So all of the muscles are shown right there in great detail. And here we have this ethereal being of harmony and balance. We see two different ways of representing a religious scene or a religious topic. But then comes in 1503. This is in the middle of before he finished completely the statue of David. In autumn of 1503, we have that. This is the Signoria, by the way. Florence is a republic. It's a democracy, and they have an actual army. They don't like to have mercenaries, but they used to have mercenaries before, and they do want to have a national militia. If you have a mercenary, you have to pay them, and they're not as I would say, how would you say, they're not as liable as somebody who fights for the nation or for the country or for the city in this case. So the ruler at the time is Soderini. He's going to commission to Leonardo to make a fresco for La Signoria and for the Grand Council Hall, which is called the Gran Concilio. And he wants Leonardo and Michelangelo to paint battle scenes. This kind of ideas comes from before, and this is the Basilica of Assisi. And here we have two artists that were also painting at the same time in the same place, Cimabue and Giotto. Both of them were painting at that time in Assisi. So this has happened before. And here we have, again, the Sala del Concilio, or this, this wonderful place where they would gather all of the politicians of Florence. They're going to have two frescoes, one in front of the other. Leonardo da Vinci by this time is 51, and Michelangelo is 29. And what they want to portray are the military triumphs of Florence, all of those victories in the battleground. All of the, let me tell you just before, both artists are not going to finish this project. Probably they didn't even start it, but we do have a lot of documentation, and we do have a lot of sketches done by other artists of what they saw, because it was such a great project that artists would just get into the workshop and just copy what Leonardo was doing or what Michelangelo was doing, or maybe they saw them later, all of those preparatory sketches. But the originals are gone. We don't have any originals by the two of them. But the importance of this is really exemplary. So from 1503, he starts working 7 years. He is working on this. He never finished it, as I mentioned, but there's a lot of information. This is probably the best known drawing of that battle, and it's called the Tavola Doria, because the collector was, of course, Doria. And this is, it's called the Battle of Anghiari. And this battle was fought with the Papal Army against Milan. And this was fought in 1440. We're already talking of 1503, so it is one of those victories. This is a representation of close combat. It's very dramatic. And I know we're missing some parts of it, but we have 4 horsemen. They're fighting, and they want to possess the standard. This one in particular was stolen in 1940 during the war, but today it's at the Uffizi. You can see it there. This is a copy by Rubens. So imagine this. We have the mercenaries that are from Milan, and I mentioned this because it is how they won, the people from Florence. They are contorted, the Florentine. They are defending their city, and they're more controlled. But there's kind of this chaos of battle. Usually we see that. And the documentation of what he was doing, we have Agostino Vespucci. He was the secretary of the Signoria of the City Hall. He is going to list all of the materials that Leonardo da Vinci needed for the scaffolding and for everything that he needed. So there's a list of whatever he needed. And remember, he had done this equestrian monument, he never finished, but he had studied how horses behave and how they go to battle. On the other side, Michelangelo was making David at the time, and Leonardo does not like young talent at all. So this is what we read. The sculptor is creating his work. In creating his work, does so by the strength of his arm by which he consumes the marble or other obdurate material in which his subject is enclosed. And this is done by most mechanical exercise, often accompanied by great sweat, which mixes with the marble dust and forms a kind of mud daubed all over his face. The marble dust flours him all over so that he looks like a baker. His back is covered with a snowstorm of chips, and his house is made filthy by the flakes and dust of stone. And this is the description Leonardo made of a sculptor, of course referring to Michelangelo, but he didn't say the name Michelangelo. So the Battle of Anghiari, as I mentioned, he made several sketches before how to capture the expression of somebody goes into battle and attacks the enemy. And here we have some drawings as well. Some are more finished than others. And this is probably one of the students, of the pupils of Leonardo da Vinci. But look at the expression that he tries to convey, this moment of this decisive battle where you're going to attack your enemy, the expression, the force of the expression. And of course, the face gets distorted of that effort. Or this other one, which we see different expressions that he's tried to capture for this huge project. For 7 years, he's working on it, and he never finished it. Can you imagine? So there are many drawings that he made before. And first, he tried, this is his first idea, to incorporate several episodes. So it's a kind of this narrative. Something is happening before, something is happening later, and he tries several compositions. Some are more scattered. And finally, he's going to decide that he wants kind of this cluster where everybody's kind of in this chaotic scene of dust and energy and anger and, of course, pure attack. And he would have different postures of the soldiers fighting. So he decided to just have one. Here are another of those examples, this movement that he wants to convey. But there's some kind of space in this sketches, so he doesn't get it still. He says, well, this is very nice and very harmonious, but I want to capture the drama of war. And he will get it, of course. We don't. There's a description in one of his writings of an imaginary battle. And you will see a river with horses galloping in it, churning up the water into a tumult of waves, foam and spray in the air, and between the legs and bodies of the horses. He has seen, of course, battles. He was with Ludovico Sforza in the battle scene. He had studied the horses to make the monument for Francesco Sforza, and this is what he's going to present. He's going to start the cartoons. Here we have an image of this project that, as I mentioned, he never finished, but look how he's going to resolve a sculpture. So because this was the idea, we have a horse and he's rampant, but he needs something to support that part of the horse. So he puts here a fallen man with a shield. That is where the weight would be of the horse. And here he's going to use it again, even though it's not going to be a sculpture anymore in this case, but he likes this idea of a fallen man with his shield. So they are all in the cluster, and this is the final design. I know that we're missing some part of this painting. We don't have the figure that is on top of that horse. We see some of the images from the drawings that he made and the sketches. He got also the idea not only from real life, but also from Roman sarcophagus, like this one that was owned by the Colonna family in Rome, in the garden. And there's an array of figures with horses and people and victims, and there's war, of course. Also, we see that in the collection of the Medici, the Medici own this medal, an antique cameo of the fall of Phaeton. And you can see here there's a horse also falling down. The story, of course, comes from a myth. Helios was the father, the son. He gives permission to his son to ride the chariot of the sun. And he tells him that he has to be careful. But the son, Phaeton, he loses control. And actually, he's going to fall, and the whole world is set on fire, because this is the chariot of the sun. Well, this is the story. Well, the other painting is by Michelangelo. So both of them are working to represent different victories of the Florentines. And this is the Battle of Cascina. And this is a battle that happened before in 1364 against Pisa. The copy that we have here was done in the 16th century, and this one that I'm showing you here is an engraving from the 19th century. So we don't have, even in this one, we don't have the original by Michelangelo. So both artists are not going to finish this painting. He gets inspired by Antonio Pollaiolo, who made this engraving, the Battle of the Naked Men, also fighting, but showing nude people. So this is not a representation of a battle by Florentines and people from Pisa. we have a representation of mythology. But he wanted to present the image of nude images in his paintings. So what we have here is that the whole scene is frozen in motion. He is painting each one of those figures in different postures, turning, twisting, doing different things, sketches that we see here on the left-hand side that shows you how he is managing the anatomy of those paintings. So he really is very knowledgeable about the human body. Also, he had made this sculpture. It's called the Battle of the Centaurs. It's in Florence. In the Casa Bonarotti, by the way, this was the house where his father would live later on. So it's a small museum in Florence, very nice, where they have some of his works, smaller, of course, works. As you can see here, there's an array of figures, of nude figures, because it is a mythological subject. And again, we see the same inspiration that Leonardo had from this sarcophagus. Some of those were part of the collections of the popes or the Medici, and they come from antiquity as well. The sketches that were left are very few. These are the first drawings of the Battle of Cascina. And what do you think he's doing? He's doing exactly as Leonardo was doing before, trying to put a cluster, trying to put drama in the battle, but it would be very, very similar as the one that was being done by Leonardo da Vinci. So he's going to change, actually, very quickly, and he's going to devise something very different. And he's going to be inspired by the story that happened in that moment, July 28 of 1364. There was a hot day, and the soldiers are relaxed, and they want to bathe. So they go to the river, of course, they go to the Arno River, and it is near also of the town of Cascina. The Arno River goes through several towns, including Florence, of course. And here we have one of the sketches. We see people going into the river to refresh themselves. They're not in the battle. Again, what he is doing is representing something that happened before the battle, and there is a moral to the story, of course. And I love really all of the sketches that are left because it shows you the original idea from Leonardo and what we have, which is a copy of the finished product that we never saw the original one. But here we have a twisting body of one of the soldiers who is turning around. He's out of the river already, and he's turning around to see what's happening. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the story. But let me show you this painting by Leonardo. This is the Holy Family called the Doni Tondo that he did more or less. Michelangelo, what did I say? Yes, what did I say? I'm sorry. I said Leonardo? Sorry. Yeah, yes, it's by Michelangelo. Thank you. You know, I know it's by Michelangelo. Thank you very much. Sometimes, you know, I got that. But why I brought you this exactly because of that. You are looking here at the Holy Family. And then you see the background. What are those bathers doing in the background? They're all naked, exactly. Why does he need to put that there? There's a Holy Family, right, in the center. And we see the Virgin Mary, we see Joseph, we see also baby Jesus. And in the back, those are nude figures. And there is an explanation, supposedly, that these are representing, representing the souls of the pure souls. I believe that Michelangelo always wanted to portray nude figures, and that was his justification of why they were there. But very often I get this question of how do we see nude figures in religious representations? Because they were humanists, they were Neoplatonists, they were accepting the importance of humans and the relationship with God. So it was banned in the Middle Ages, but not in Florence in the 15th and 16th century. But here we go. How do we find this? All of those naked bodies, all of those figures twisting and doing different gestures and reacting to something that happened. Yes?
It's not the battle, it was before the battle.
Exactly.
And they're rushing to get out of the river.
Exactly.
Because and the dressing very quickly.
Exactly.
Because the enemy was coming.
Exactly, I was about to say that, but you said it correctly. It is, so remember David was represented before the battle. This is the same idea. He's not representing the battle, he's representing just before the battle. And of course, we see this man right here. He's sounding the alarm. Actually, Mano Donati, we know exactly the name of this man who's the hero of the story. He is the commander, and he did not go to the Arno River to refresh himself. He is on guard, and he raised the alarm. The enemy is coming, exactly what you were saying. So what happens really is that they have to rush out of the water. And in this case, they were condottieri, they were mercenaries, they were paid soldiers. So that changed afterwards. So there's a moral story here. You cannot rely on those mercenaries. You cannot rely on the condottieri. Yes?
Oh, see, oh, you know, what I don't understand is the pair of hands under the. water.
Uh-huh.
I don't
He's
understand.
it looks like he's drowning, but he's not. It's like he's just, bathing there, and he still doesn't know that everybody is coming out of the water. He's still chilling there. Exactly, he's not hurrying up at all. But we have here all of the different postures. And this man right here, look at him. First of all, he is dressing. Of course, he's putting his pants or whatever. And this is an old commander. Look at him. He looks older. And he actually has these leaves of vine, because he's, of course, Michelangelo is making a point here. He's the same as Bacchus. He's a representation of corruption and decadence. That's why he puts that vine leaves on his head. So the cartoons, what are the cartoons? Those are the preparatory drawings that are already the size that they're going to use on the frescoes. So they are going to be presented, even though Leonardo and Michelangelo and later on Leonardo are going to leave the project, they're going to be displayed because of the beautiful representation. So those cartoons done by Michelangelo are going to be displayed in the Medici Palace, and many artists are going to look at them. They're going to really copy them. That's why we have those copies today. But then they're going to take pieces, and all of it dispersed, and it was lost. Probably it was destroyed. Baccio was one opponent. He wanted to protect Da Vinci. He was one of the pupils of Da Vinci. That's a theory. But what we know is that they're no longer with us. They have been lost. We don't have any evidence of them anymore, only the drawings that were made afterwards. This one, for example, is a perfect way of showing you. Agostino Veneziano, who did this engraving in 1524, just a few years afterwards, he used some of the figures, but in a different composition. And let me show you some of them, because you can recognize some of the figures. Let me show you here, done by Michelangelo. Or this other one, which we see, the old commander, remember that one? Here it is. And even these three figures right here, and even the hands of that one who's coming out of the water are right there. But the composition is completely different. And look at the background. There's a mountain, there is a town over there, there are other people also in the surroundings. So this is his interpretation of this of the painting done by Michelangelo. And by the way, because we have a copy, we don't know if those hands that we saw before, let me show you here, are like this or like this, coming out of the water. So remember, this is a copy. And this is a digital reconstruction, supposedly with the colors. So the ones that had already put their pants on, the purple ones that we see here, the pink mantles that we have also around there. Of course, you look at it differently, because you realize that most of them are nude, and they are trying to hurry up. So we have the Tavola Doria, where Leonardo da Vinci was not doing the traditional fresco technique, which is the giornata, where you put plaster, you use tempera, and the pigment is going to be adhered into the stucco, into the plaster, into the wall. So what he was doing, he was using different things that he was learning about from the writings by Pliny, encaustic, which actually they use wax. But he starts to mix all of those elements, all of those different techniques, and it does not work at all. So instead of the giornata, he wanted to have more time. Remember, giornata is a day's work, and the plaster begins to dry. So you have to work very quickly. When it dries, you're done. You have to come another day, again, put wet plaster, work on it, and then it dries, and again. So it's really very slowly, very slow, a technique that's very slow. So he wanted more time. He wanted more time to it, and that's why he is going to use that combination. So his oil paints that are not used in fresco, they're going to start dripping, and the plaster did not dry because of the wax, the encaustic. So it was a mess, what I understand. So that's why he's going to leave, and he's not going to finish this painting in 1504. After he saw the David, etc., he's going to interrupt the work, and he's going to go to Piombino because there's a war with Pisa. And this is a map from later on, but this is Piombino. And he works as an engineer. Well, what we have here are two different versions. One happens in the battle, the other one happens before the battle. But in one, we have the enemy. The enemy is in front of the other army. They are confronting each other. It is fearsome. They are fighting. In Michelangelo, we don't see the enemy. We know that there's an enemy coming, but we don't see the enemy, and it could be anything. The enemy, it doesn't have to be the army. It can be tyranny, it can be a malevolent lord, it can be anything. So the enemy is invisible. So both of them are unfinished, and they show their work in maturity and their independence as artists. So we have that they did not tell them. Soderini is not going to tell them, we need to have so many figures, or we need to do so and so. Each one of them are going to choose what to represent in their paintings. But nevertheless, they never finished it. And it is a kind of art of propaganda. Why? Because the idea was to inspire the people from Florence to fight against Pisa. That was one of the enemies, of course. The Battle of Anghiari is celebrating the victories of and the horrors of war, and this is the representation. And the Battle of Cascina, it is, as I mentioned, before the victory. In April 1506, Leonardo da Vinci he gets out of the will of his father. Remember, he was illegitimate, and we have a quarrel between them with his half brothers and with his uncle, and over the inheritance. And we see all of these ideas from one of the manuscripts, the Codex Atlanticus, where we find a lot of things. It's a very large codex, all of the manuscripts. What happened to Michelangelo? He goes and he's going to be painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Remember, this was also painted by other artists, all of the walls, including Botticelli. And 1508, he's painting the ceiling. So that's also, he's going to leave. What happened to this place? Giorgio Vasari comes along, the same man. And he covered, well, of course, he was commissioned to cover the mess that had been left there, those walls. So he's going to cover the Sala de Concilio with paintings of victories of the Florentines. But this is Giorgio Vasari. All of what you can see today in that Palazzo Vecchio was painted by Giorgio Vasari. There are magnificent paintings, not the same as what we see in Leonardo or Michelangelo, but they're really very large. They are representing all of the different battles and victories. And here we have one of them, Cosimo Marziano. And let me show you some of them. Full of people, horses, battle scenes, people dying, being wounded, etc. There was a clue, probably, that was left by Giorgio Vasari. And these scholars think there was a clue. And in a detail right here, it says cerca trova, which means seek and you shall find. And some scholars, here it is, Cerca Trova. There's this banner, and they thought that there was something there. The National Geographic and other institutions are going to set up this research and studies in 2012. And they're going to have scholars and art historians and many people who are going to be involved in this study. And they're going to bring a small camera into the wall because they realize there is a wall behind and there's a space. So Vasari did not paint on top of what Leonardo da Vinci did. He actually built another wall, and probably he was protecting the work by Leonardo da Vinci. So they thought they could find something in there. So they made a small hole and they placed a camera to see if there was something there. Here we have the hole. But they did not find anything. So it is still a mystery, even though there's a space. And supposedly, some say that this project, they had a time frame, very short time frame, and they did not allow them to work anymore or make other holes. So that's why probably they did not find it. But nevertheless, if they find something, it's going to be the mess that Leonardo left. So it's better to have that, I believe, the mystery of it, instead of just finding whatever he did. Now, let me tell you about some other works, because this is an unfinished work by Michelangelo. And it's called the Taddei Tondo. The Tondo means a circular work. It is made out of marble. It is really massive. I know that you don't realize this here, but because it is unfinished, you find that the figures kind of emerge from that rough marble. And you can see the chisel marks and how he worked. This tells us a lot about the way that he worked. Look at the figure of the baby, twisting, very natural. The way that you would think a baby would behave with her mother, with his mother. Usually we have images of the Virgin carrying the child, kind of stiff, kind of baby Jesus. Here we have an image of a mother in profile, very sweet representation of her profile, in front of probably John the Baptist, probably in front, and baby Jesus playing and just twisting to one side. So we have, this is the image of that Tondo. It's really very, very big and very heavy. And he never finished this. It's raining terribly. Last year, there was an incredible exhibition, which I did not go, in London, the Royal Academy in London. It was called Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael, Florence 1504, because that year is when they were working together. They were at the same time, in the same place, being both famous, having commissions, and of course the two battles that were represented, the Anghiari and the Cascina, both of them working at the same time. So this exhibition was really very, very successful, showing us not only Leonardo and Da Vinci, but also the young Raphael, who was 21 years old in 1504. So we have 3 generations of artists all converging in a very important city, which was the capital of art, of the Renaissance, really. So here we have an image of that exhibition with one of the paintings by Raphael, the Virgin and Child. And I did not put here the Tondo by Michelangelo, but you can see how Raphael is also doing a much more naturalistic representation of Jesus Christ, of the baby Jesus here. But this painting, which was not a finished thing, is an unfinished cartoon, again, the preparatory drawing, because the idea is you have this is the exact size that you're gonna do. They put holes in it, and then you have your panel or your wood panel. In that case, usually they use wood panel or the canvas, and then you pounce some kind of charcoal dust on the holes. So everything is set up on the canvas or the panel.
It's an outline that they put.
Sometimes it's an outline, sometimes are dots, some holes. Yes, sometimes are holes, so you pounce it.
Very tiny.
Very tiny holes, exactly. So then you see the outline, but of holes. Yes, of dots, actually, that's what you see. Yeah, of dust, of charcoal dust. So this was actually probably the cartoon that Vasari talks about, that it was on display to the public in the year 1500s. Probably this is it, but we don't know. Scholars think it is. And even though it's not finished, look at the faces. They're highly done in a particular beautiful, delicate way. And there are some connections between all of the four figures. Here we have Anne looking at Mary. Mary is looking at the scene of her baby, Jesus, and John the Baptist. So all of them are connected in this representation. But it's a very weird representation because as you can see right here, Mary is sitting on the lap of her mother, Anne, but she's a grown-up lady, right? So it's kind of weird, but it's interesting and it's a very important one. And this has been related or compared to the tondo made by Michelangelo. So we have Leonardo da Vinci, who died when he was 63 years old, being very famous, very well known. People loved him. He actually died in France. He was taken there by the French king, Francis I, because he loved his art, and he gave him a small castle nearby his own palace in Amboise, and that's where, and it's called the Chateau Claude Lucet. So he died when he was 63 years old in 1519. And Michelangelo died in 1564. He had a very long life. He had very few friends. He almost worked in isolation. He didn't like to have any assistants because he was really kind of a quarrelsome, impulsive guy. But nevertheless, these two are genius. And I think this is it for today. And hopefully you have enjoyed today's class, but before we go, any questions? Thank you. Questions or comments before we go? Yes, go ahead.
I just want to mention there was a very good book called Oil and Marble about their relationship. If you read it.
That's very true. I read it. I don't know when it was published, and I remember reading it. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of information about this. I actually I'm glad that you mentioned it because I have to look it up to see if I have something else. Yeah.
I highly recommend it. Very good.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And there are others that have been published today, not today, but recently, about that relationship as well. There are newer versions of it. So, well, yes. Any other questions, comments?
Some of the unfinished Pietas, were they all Michelangelo or were they Leonardo's?
The Pietà?
Yeah.
The unfinished Pietà that I mentioned is an unfinished by Michelangelo.
I saw something in the Vinci Museum in Milan. that I
Okay.
think had some.
Yes.
Maybe I'm confusing it, I don't know.
I have to think about, because I'm thinking about the Virgin of the Rocks, which he finished.
Finished Pietà that I saw within the Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's
Behind
that's
the
Michelangelo. That's exactly.
Near the David.
That's a Michelangelo one. But yes, I'm trying to think about a
There is
painting.
another one that they call La Pietà in Bruges.
Yes, that's very true. And actually, that one was stolen by the Nazis, and they recovered it. The one that it's called the one in Bruges.
The guy called it La Pietà, but he said, not La Pietà.
It's not a Pietà.
They called it La
I
Pietà.
know, it's a virgin. That's very true. Thank you. Any other? Yes.
And there's one with the four figures, and he's on top. It looks like
That's the one that is at the academy. No, the one with the four figures is at the academy. Yes, that's very true. Yes.
There's nothing they can do to try to restore any of the Last Supper, is there?
They did. They restored it already, but there's nothing, you could have to repaint it,
Not
the
that.
whole thing, if you restore it completely. There's no way that they can do that.
And when did oil painting come from the Netherlands to Italy, to Florence?
At the beginning of when Leonardo da Vinci was working with Verrocchio, the beginning of it, we see in one of the paintings where he actually is the baptism of Christ, and Leonardo da Vinci did just the angels, and he used oil painting, and the rest is tempera. Only the things that he painted were in oil. So this is the beginning that we have when the Netherlands influenced in using oil. Yeah.
In Flanders.
I'm sorry?
In Flanders.
In Flanders, yes, in Flanders.
David is in La Academia.
David is in la Academia.
What's the
Yes.
name of the little museum right behind the Duomo?
Oh, the Museum of the Opera.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought there was.
Yeah, the opera, even though we think it's an opera house, no, it's not the opera house. The opera is where you do things, to operare, to work.
Work.
Exactly, to work. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you in person.
Yes.
Did you start the new book?
Well, I started